Girl slips undercover secret note owner, and suddenly he calls for backup. The Vanguard Club didn't exist, at least not officially. No website advertised its location. No sign hung above its unmarked entrance tucked between two unassuming buildings in the financial district. Its phone number changed monthly, and membership required recommendations from 3 existing patrons, each with a net worth exceeding 9 figures. Mia James straightened her pristine black uniform and passed through the employee entrance, a ritual she'd performed 5 nights a week for the past year. The security scan registered her biometrics while a guard who never smiled inspected her appearance with military precision. "Evening, Davis," she said, having learned that acknowledging the guards by name earned a fraction more respect. He nodded once, the closest thing to warmth she'd received in months. The service corridor opened into a realm where money had long ceased to be a concern for its patrons. Vanguard wasn't merely exclusive. It was a sanctuary where billionaires could escape the constraints of public scrutiny, where handshakes over aged whiskey replaced contracts, and where fortunes changed hands with whispered agreements rather than signed documents. And Mia, invisible by design, had front row seats to it all. "James, you're Section 3 tonight," her supervisor Marcus announced, sliding the tablet toward her. "Private room reservations for Harrington at 9. Lachlan at 10:30. Standard protocol." Standard protocol meant perfect service, absolute discretion, and most importantly, selective deafness. Hear nothing. Remember nothing. Repeat nothing. "Understood," Mia said, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. She perfected the art of blending into backgrounds, becoming part of the decor, present but unseeable. As she arranged crystal glasses at the marble-topped bar, Mia caught her reflection in the mirrored backdrop. 26 years old with a master's degree in finance, yet here she was, serving drinks to people who could buy and sell her entire existence without blinking. The irony wasn't lost on her. But Vanguard paid 3 times the industry standard, and watching the powerful manipulate markets from the shadows had proven more educational than her expensive degree. Every night was a masterclass in power, influence, and the subtle art of leveraging both. "Mia!" A voice jolted her from her thoughts. It belonged to Adrian, a fellow staff member who joined about 3 months ago. Unlike the other employees who maintained rigid professionalism, Adrian possessed a curious watchfulness that mirrored her own. "You're million-miling again." She smiled despite herself. "Just mentally calculating my student loan interest against tonight's tips." "Depressing math," he said, his voice low and unexpectedly refined for someone who supposedly came from food service backgrounds. There was something about Adrian that never quite fit his cover story, his posture too straight, his observations too incisive, his calm too unshakable for someone merely mixing drinks and carrying trays. "The most dangerous kind," she replied, arranging garnishes with surgical precision. The club began filling with its exclusive clientele as the evening progressed. Mia navigated the main floor with practiced efficiency, invisible until needed, then magically materialized with exactly what was required before disappearing again. At precisely 9 o'clock, Victor Harrington arrived with his usual entourage. The investment mogul controlled a portfolio worth billions and had a reputation for aggressive corporate takeovers. Tonight, however, his customary confidence seemed edged with tension. "Macallan 25 neat," he ordered without looking at her, his attention fixed on his phone. As Mia placed the drink before him, she noticed Marcus directing her toward the VIP lounge, a separated section where the truly influential conducted their most private affairs. The space was arranged to create optimal privacy, acoustic engineering that contained conversations within their immediate vicinity, furniture positioned to prevent lip reading, and strict no-device policies enforced by signal jammers. "Gentlemen, may I refresh your drinks?" Mia asked as she approached a secluded corner booth where Harrington had joined 3 other men. One of them, Kenneth Shaw, a notorious venture capitalist, waved her away impatiently, but Harrington gestured for another round. As she leaned to collect the empty glasses, fragments of their conversation reached her. "Confirmed his identity last week," Shaw was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. "Been hiding in plain sight for months. And the board? This from Harrington, his finger tracing the rim of his glass. Divided. Majority support requires just one more signature. He won't sell, countered a third man, Malcolm Reed, whose family's banking dynasty stretched back generations. Not willingly. Then we create circumstances where willingness becomes irrelevant, Harrington replied with chilling finality. The club changes hands by the end of the week. One way or another. Mia kept her expression neutral as she placed fresh drinks on the table, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd overheard countless confidential discussions before, insider trading, political maneuverings, extramarital affairs, but something about this exchange raised the hairs on her neck. Back at the service station, she found Adrian methodically polishing glassware, his movements economical and precise. Heavy hitters tonight, he remarked casually, though his eyes seemed to track specific patrons with unusual interest. The heaviest, Mia agreed, suddenly wondering about Adrian's constant presence during Harrington's visits. About his careful attention to certain conversations. About his habit of appearing in precisely the right places at precisely the right moments. A wild thought struck her, so improbable she almost dismissed it immediately. But as she observed Adrian's calculated movements, the pieces began shifting into a new configuration. The mysterious owner of Vanguard was famously reclusive. No photographs existed. No public appearances. Some questioned whether he was real or merely a corporate fiction. But what if? Mia watched Adrian more carefully now, noting how staff deferred to him despite his supposedly junior position. How security nodded respectfully when he passed. How he alone seemed to move through the club with the subtle authority of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. What if the owner hadn't entrusted the investigation to someone else? What if he'd decided to conduct it himself? Private room access only tonight, Mia. Harrington's request. Marcus handed her an access card to the restricted VIP lounge, the inner sanctum within the already exclusive Vanguard Club. The invitation-only space occupied the entire top floor, accessible by a single elevator that required both biometric confirmation and the temporary access card she now held. Any special instructions? Mia asked, tucking the card into her pocket. Just the usual. Invisible service, deaf ears. Marcus hesitated, then added something unusual. And Mia? Be careful up there tonight. The air feels different. The elevator ascended silently to the top floor. When the doors opened, Mia stepped into an environment that made the main club look almost commonplace by comparison. While the lower floors impressed with obvious luxury, the VIP lounge exuded power in its restraint, understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted wealth. Dark mahogany panels lined the walls, interspersed with museum-quality art that rotated monthly. Ambient lighting cast soft shadows across seating arrangements designed for maximum privacy. Only 7 guests occupied the space tonight, an unusually small number, all clustered around Harrington in the central seating area. Mia approached with practiced deference. Good evening, gentlemen. What may I bring you? Victor Harrington looked up, his steel-gray eyes registering her presence without truly seeing her. The 82 Macallan for everyone. She nodded and retreated to the private bar, where she found Adrian arranging glasses with methodical precision. You're up here tonight? She asked, surprised to see him in the restricted area. Staff shortage, he replied, though she suspected the explanation was too convenient. He handed her a tray of crystal tumblers. 7 of the 82. I've already pulled it. As she returned with the drinks, the conversation at the main table fell silent. She placed each glass with fluid efficiency, careful to avoid eye contact while remaining attentive to empty glasses or shifting body language that might signal needs. She had nearly finished when Harrington spoke again. Gentlemen, let's continue. The opportunity won't remain open indefinitely. Mia slowed her movements fractionally, attuning her ears to their hushed conversation as she collected discarded napkins. The intelligence is solid? This from Shaw, leaning forward with uncharacteristic intensity. Absolutely confirmed, Harrington replied. Locke has been personally monitoring the club for months. Operating undercover. Mia nearly fumbled the glass. Adrian Locke, the reclusive billionaire whose name appeared on financial papers as Vanguard's owner but whose face remained unknown even in the most exclusive circles. And you're certain it's him? Reed asked, swirling amber liquid in his glass. Without question. My source inside his private security team confirmed it 3 days ago. Then we move tonight, announced a voice Mia didn't immediately recognize. She glanced up briefly to see Elias Chin, the tech mogul whose cybersecurity empire had made him the newest addition to the Billionaires Club. The paperwork is prepared. Once executed, control transfers immediately. And if he refuses? This from another man, Bradley Winters, whose family controlled shipping routes across 3 continents. Harrington's smile never reached his eyes. That's why we've arranged a contingency. Financial coercion is preferable, but physical persuasion remains an option. I won't be party to anything messy, Reed interjected, his aristocratic features pinched with distaste. Nothing traceable, Harrington assured him. But make no mistake, by morning, Vanguard will have new ownership. Locke's little spy game ends tonight. Mia maintained her composed expression through years of practice, but internally her mind raced. Not only was Adrian Locke, the actual owner, working undercover within his own establishment, but these men were planning to force him out tonight, through financial manipulation or actual violence. And they believed they knew his identity. She retreated to the bar, fighting to keep her hands steady as she arranged fresh cocktail napkins. Everything all right? Adrian asked, his voice low as he polished a glass with meticulous attention. Mia studied him surreptitiously. Medium height, athletic build beneath the tailored staff uniform, brown hair cut in an expensive but understated style, and eyes that noticed everything while revealing nothing. Nothing about him screamed billionaire, but perhaps that was precisely the point. Just the usual power plays, she replied noncommittally. A light chime sounded, indicating new arrivals. The elevator doors opened to reveal 2 men Mia recognized as Harrington's personal security, both former military, based on their bearing and the subtle bulges beneath their tailored jackets that suggested concealed weapons. Sir? One nodded to Harrington as they positioned themselves near the exit, not approaching the table, but establishing a perimeter. Mia felt Adrian tense beside her, his eyes tracking the newcomers with controlled alertness. I need to check inventory downstairs, he said casually, though his gaze remained fixed on Harrington's security. Back in 15. As he turned to leave, Mia made her decision. If Adrian truly was Locke, he was walking into danger. If he wasn't, well, she'd likely lose her job for interfering in club business. Actually, she said, keeping her voice professional, Marcus asked me to restock the Macallan. I can handle it while you cover the floor. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, surprise, perhaps appreciation. All right. Don't be long. The moment the elevator doors closed behind him, Mia heard Harrington's voice rise slightly. Confirm his location. One of the security men pressed his earpiece. Still on the premises, 18th floor, moving toward the storage area. Perfect. Harrington smiled. Let's proceed with the meeting as planned. Once all signatures are secured, move on Locke. And gentlemen, his gaze swept the assembled power brokers. When this is done, Vanguard becomes the hub we've always envisioned. No more hiding our true operations behind social niceties. Mia's blood ran cold. Whatever Vanguard currently concealed was apparently just the beginning of what these men planned. And Adrian, whether Locke or not, was their target. She needed to warn him. But how? The security men were watching her now, their attention drawn by her prolonged stillness. Another round, gentlemen? She asked, forcing a professional smile as her mind frantically searched for a solution. Time seemed to compress around Mia as she moved between tables with mechanical precision, her mind racing faster than her carefully measured steps. Harrington's security maintained their vigilant watch, one by the elevator, the other casually circling the perimeter, his gaze repeatedly settling on her. She needed to reach Adrian, but leaving the floor now would only trigger suspicion. The VIP lounge had no security cameras, a feature that normally ensured privacy for its elite clientele but now meant no witnesses to whatever Harrington planned. "Another Macallan, miss," Shaw called, raising his empty glass. Mia nodded and retreated to the bar, where she quickly poured the amber liquid. As she placed the fresh napkin beneath the glass, a desperate idea formed. Glancing over her shoulder to confirm she wasn't being watched, she pulled a thin black pen from her vest pocket, carried for signing receipts, and scrawled a hasty message on the corner of a cocktail napkin. "They're planning to move tonight. Don't go alone." Simple, urgent, clear. She folded the napkin into her palm and returned to Shaw's table, placing his drink with practiced grace. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, aware of Harrington's security shifting positions behind her. "That's all for now," Shaw replied without looking up from his phone. Mia circulated among the other guests, collecting empty glasses while scanning for an opportunity. The elevator chimed, and her heart lurched as Adrian stepped back into the lounge, his expression neutral but his eyes alert. He'd returned sooner than expected. Her opportunity came when Harrington summoned Adrian to adjust the room's temperature controls. As Adrian moved toward the wall panel near Harrington's table, Mia timed her approach to coincide with his. "Pardon me," she murmured as they passed each other in the narrow space between tables. In that fleeting moment of proximity, Mia executed the move she'd practiced countless times, transferring tips between servers, fingers brushing fabric, slipping the folded napkin into Adrian's jacket pocket with such subtlety that not even the recipient usually noticed until later. But Adrian wasn't the average recipient. His eyes flicked toward her, just a millisecond of contact, but in that instant she knew he'd felt the papers slide into his pocket. Yet his expression remained unchanged as he continued to the temperature controls. Mia circulated to the opposite side of the room, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Had anyone noticed? The security man by the elevator seemed absorbed in his earpiece, while the second had momentarily disappeared down the hallway leading to the private restrooms. Adrian completed his task with unhurried efficiency, then returned to the bar. From the corner of her eye, Mia watched him reach into his pocket, a casual gesture that might have been checking for his phone. His fingers encountered the napkin. Without pausing in his work, he unfolded it partially within his pocket, reading her message while arranging glasses on the counter. Nothing in his demeanor changed, yet Mia sensed the shift immediately, like watching a leopard go from rest to readiness without a visible signal. When he looked up again, Adrian was transformed. The careful veil of subservience had fallen away from his eyes, revealing a cold, calculating intensity that seemed to evaluate every exit, every potential weapon, every person in the room with new purpose. This was no longer a man playing a role. This was someone preparing for combat. "Bathroom break," he mentioned to her, his voice still casual despite the complete shift in his bearing. "Cover the bar for a moment." Harrington's voice cut across the room. "Another bottle of the Macallan. The 82. Adrian paused, then smoothly redirected toward the private wine cellar adjacent to the lounge. "I'll retrieve it, sir." Mia busied herself wiping down the bar counter, fighting to control her breathing. One of the security men, the one who had disappeared earlier, re-entered the lounge and made a subtle hand gesture to his partner. Something was happening. The minutes stretched painfully as she watched the door to the wine cellar, expecting Adrian to return. When he finally emerged, he carried not only the requested bottle but also had his phone in hand, the first time she'd ever seen him use a personal device during service hours. As he passed behind her at the bar, he whispered, "Thank you," so softly she almost thought she'd imagined it. The atmosphere in the room had shifted imperceptibly. The conversations continued, glasses clinked, exclusive deals were still being brokered in hushed tones, but Mia sensed an undercurrent of tension rippling beneath the surface. Adrian poured Harrington's requested Macallan with perfect form, his movements precise as ever. But now Mia could see what she'd missed before, the subtle economy of motion, the constant awareness of his surroundings, the way he positioned himself to maintain sight lines to both exit points. These weren't the habits of a career server, they were the instincts of someone trained to anticipate threats. "Mia!" Harrington's voice jolted her from her observations. Another sparkling water. She moved to fulfill the request, aware of Adrian watching from the bar. As she placed the water before Harrington, he caught her wrist, not roughly, but with unmistakable authority. "Have we met before?" he asked, his gaze penetrating. "Outside of Vanguard, perhaps?" "I don't believe so, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. "Curious," he said, not releasing her wrist. "You seem familiar." From across the room, she felt Adrian's focus sharpen like a laser. "Perhaps at the Metropolitan Charity Gala last month?" Harrington continued, his grip tightening slightly. "You served there as well, didn't you?" "No, sir," Mia replied truthfully. "I work exclusively for Vanguard." Something in her answer seemed to satisfy him, as he finally released her wrist. "My mistake." As she retreated, she noticed one of the security men speaking quietly into his earpiece, his eyes following her movements. The second security man had positioned himself near the elevator, the only exit. Mia returned to the bar, where Adrian was methodically drying glasses. "Interesting question," he murmured, not looking at her. "Yes," she agreed, the single word carrying volumes of unspoken concern. "I believe," Adrian said, his voice barely audible, "that we may have a situation developing." Before Mia could respond, the security man by the elevator stepped forward. "Miss," he called, his tone professional but brooking no argument. "Mr. Harrington would like to speak with you privately." Adrian tensed beside her, his hands stilling on the glass. "Now, please," the security man added when she hesitated. Mia felt a chill travel down her spine as she placed down her towel. She'd crossed an invisible line, and Harrington knew it. Adrian's fingers tightened around the glass he was polishing, his eyes meeting Mia's for a split second, a silent communication passing between them. "Don't resist. Play along." She nodded almost imperceptibly and followed the security man across the lounge. Every step felt like walking through quicksand, her instincts screaming to run, while her training insisted on maintaining composure. "I'll only be a moment," she said to Adrian, her voice impressively steady. The moment she was led away, Adrian placed the glass down with deliberate care and slipped through the service door adjacent to the bar. The narrow corridor beyond, designed for staff to move discreetly throughout the club, provided temporary sanctuary from watching eyes. He pulled out his phone, no longer concerned with maintaining his cover. Mia's warning had accelerated his timeline, but he'd suspected something was brewing. The pieces had been falling into place for weeks. Unusual financial inquiries, staff being questioned about his routines, the sudden interest from Harrington's group in Vanguard's operational structure. He dialed a number from memory. "Initiate protocol echo," he said when the line connected, his voice transformed from the deferential tone of a service worker to one accustomed to commanding elite security forces. "Full team, main entrance and service corridors. Surveillance blackout on my mark." The voice on the other end, Keller, his head of security, responded with military precision. "Confirmed. Team's positioning now. ETA 4 minutes. Expedite," Adrian ordered. "We have a hostage situation developing." "One of our staff, Mia James." "Acknowledged." Switching to 3-minute protocol. Adrian ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, mentally cataloging the resources at his disposal. 8 security personnel would enter through various access points. The club's integrated security system could be remotely overridden to his specifications. Every room had hidden panic buttons, including within the VIP lounge, that could trigger lockdown protocols. He'd built Vanguard as the ultimate fortress disguised as a playground for the elite. Now it was time to activate its defenses. Meanwhile, Mia found herself escorted not to Harrington's table but toward the private conference room at the far end of the lounge. Her mind raced through possible scenarios, none of them ending well. Whatever Harrington suspected, being isolated from witnesses could only mean trouble. "In here," the security man directed, opening a heavy door and gesturing for her to enter. The conference room was dimly lit, dominated by a massive table of polished black marble. Victor Harrington sat at the far end, examining documents spread before him. He didn't look up as she entered. "Close the door," he ordered the security man, who complied before positioning himself by the exit. Silence stretched for uncomfortable seconds as Harrington continued studying the papers. Finally, he raised his gaze to meet hers. "Your employment record indicates you've been with Vanguard for exactly 1 year," he stated. "Exemplary service reviews. No disciplinary issues. Background check clean as a whistle." Mia remained silent, uncertain where this was heading. "Perfect references," Harrington continued. "Almost too perfect. And yet," he slid one document forward, "we can find no record of your employment at the establishments listed before Vanguard." Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "There must be some mistake." "Indeed," Harrington agreed with a thin smile. "The mistake was mine, assuming Locke would be the only one playing undercover in his own establishment." The accusation hung in the air between them. Mia's mind spun with the implications. He thought she was working for Adrian, perhaps security or private intelligence. "I'm just a waitress, Mr. Harrington." "A waitress who just happened to pass something to our disguised owner?" His voice remained conversational, but his eyes had turned to ice. "My man saw the exchange." "What was it? A warning? Information about our plans?" Before she could formulate a response, the security man's earpiece crackled. His expression changed as he listened to whatever message was coming through. "Sir," he interrupted, his professional demeanor slipping. "We have a situation. Multiple vehicles approaching the service entrance. Security team reports armed personnel." Harrington's composure fractured momentarily. "How many?" "At least 8, possibly more." "Lock down the floor," Harrington snapped, rising from his chair. "No one enters, no one leaves. Alert Chin, tell him to accelerate the transfers. We need controlling interests before Locke can mobilize his board members." The security man spoke rapidly into his communication device while Harrington turned his attention back to Mia. "It seems your employer moves quickly," he said. "Unfortunately for you, that makes your value as leverage significantly higher." He nodded to the security man, who produced a zip tie from his jacket pocket. "Restrain her," Harrington ordered. "Then bring her to the main room. Let's see how much Locke values his loyal staff." Mia backed away, her server's instinct to avoid confrontation warring with her survival instinct to fight. "You're making a mistake." "The mistake," Harrington replied coldly, "was Locke thinking he could play games in a world where the stakes involve billions. This club is merely a front for what really happens here, influence trading that shapes global markets. Did he really believe we wouldn't notice his investigation?" The security man advanced on Mia, zip tie ready. "Mr. Harrington," the second security operative called from the doorway, his voice tight with tension. "The elevators have stopped responding, and the emergency stairwell access has been sealed." A look of genuine surprise crossed Harrington's face before hardening into cold calculation. "He's isolating the floor." "Chun!" He strode from the conference room back into the main lounge, leaving Mia with the first security man, who grabbed her arm roughly. "Move!" he ordered, shoving her forward. In the main lounge, chaos had erupted beneath a veneer of controlled panic. The billionaires who moments before had been casually discussing the hostile takeover now huddled around Elias Chen, whose fingers flew across a tablet. "The transfers are processing," Chen reported. 60 seconds to completion. "And the override codes?" Harrington demanded. "Attempting now, but the system's fighting back. Someone's actively countering my access." Mia was pushed into a chair, her hands secured behind her back with the zip tie. She scanned the room for Adrian but saw no sign of him. Had he escaped? Or was he already implementing whatever countermeasures his call had set in motion? Her question was answered when every light in the VIP lounge simultaneously dimmed, then returned at half brightness. A subtle electronic tone sounded, 3 short pulses that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The security men exchanged alarmed glances. "What the hell was that?" one of them asked, hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. Harrington's face had gone pale. "Lockdown protocol," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But that's impossible without." The realization dawned visibly on his face at the exact moment the main doors to the VIP lounge slid open. Adrian walked in, but not as the deferential staff member of moments before. His entire bearing had transformed. This was Adrian Locke as he truly existed, a man whose presence commanded absolute authority, whose casual stride projected lethal competence beneath civilized restraint. Behind him stood 4 men in tailored suits, their postures unmistakably military despite their civilian attire. "Gentlemen," Adrian said, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent room, "I believe we need to discuss your rather hostile business proposition." The atmosphere in the VIP lounge crystallized into something dangerous, like oxygen molecules aligning before a flash fire. Harrington's security men instinctively moved their hands toward concealed weapons, only to freeze as Adrian's security team responded in kind, their movements more practiced, more certain. "I wouldn't," Adrian said quietly, his gaze fixed on Harrington. "My men have rather itchy trigger fingers, and the club's insurance policy doesn't cover bloodstains on $18,000 carpeting." A tense silence hung in the air until Shaw broke it with forced laughter. "Locke, quite the dramatic entrance. Though I must say, the service uniform is a bit beneath your pay grade." "Theatrics," Victor spat, recovering his composure. "Is this really necessary, Adrian? We're all businessmen here." "Are we?" Adrian moved further into the room, his security maintaining formation behind him. His eyes flicked briefly to Mia, noting the zip ties binding her wrists. Something cold and furious flickered across his features before he mastered it. "Businessmen don't typically restrain my staff or plan armed confrontations in my establishment." "A misunderstanding," Harrington offered smoothly. "Your employee was behaving suspiciously. Given recent security concerns, we were merely being cautious." Adrian walked to where Mia sat and produced a small folding knife from his pocket. With one precise movement, he sliced through the plastic restraint, his fingers briefly touching her wrist in a gesture that might have been reassurance or apology. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Mia whispered, rubbing circulation back into her hands. Adrian turned back to the assembled billionaires, all pretense of subservience gone. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in positions of absolute authority. "Let me ensure there are no further misunderstandings," he said. "Keller, secure the room." One of his security team moved to the bar area where a hidden panel revealed a control interface. After entering a sequence, a soft electronic hum filled the room. "Signal dampening activated," the man reported. "No communications in or out. Security feed isolated." Adrian nodded before addressing the group again. "Now, gentlemen, let's discuss what's really happening here. A hostile takeover attempt of my club, orchestrated through shell corporations and leveraged board positions. All culminating in tonight's rather dramatic effort to seize controlling interests while planning to, what was the phrase?" He glanced at Mia. "Physical persuasion? You're overreacting," Reed protested, his aristocratic features pinched with indignation. "This was a perfectly legitimate business proposition." "Was it?" Adrian moved to the center table where Chen's tablet still displayed active financial transactions. With a casual gesture, he turned the screen toward the group. "Legitimate business doesn't typically involve unauthorized transfers from offshore accounts linked to less than reputable enterprises." Chen blanched, his technological confidence evaporating. "You can't prove any connection," Harrington interjected, though his usual authority sounded hollow. "Actually," Adrian countered, "I've been compiling evidence for months. Financial records, recorded conversations, witness testimonies." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Which brings us to the obvious question, why?" He circled the room slowly, studied each man in turn. "Vanguard is profitable, certainly, but hardly the most lucrative venture in any of your portfolios. The operational costs alone make it more of a prestige holding than a revenue generator." Harrington and Shaw exchanged glances, a silent communication that didn't escape Adrian's notice. Unless, Adrian continued, the club itself isn't the actual target. It's what happens here. The information that flows through these rooms. The deals brokered under the cover of social gatherings. He stopped directly before Harrington. You didn't want my club. You wanted my intelligence network. The accusation landed with palpable impact. Mia watched the color drain from several faces around the room. Whatever Adrian was implying clearly struck a nerve. Ridiculous. Harrington scoffed, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. Adrian smiled thinly. Vanguard was never just a club for the elite, Victor. It was always an intelligence operation, my personal listening post in the world of high finance and corporate maneuvering. He glanced around the room. Every conversation, every handshake deal, every whispered confidence has been meticulously archived. Not for blackmail. I have no interest in such crude tactics, but for information. Patterns. Movements of power. Reed sank heavily into his chair. You've been spying on us. All this time. I prefer to call it maintaining awareness, Adrian replied. But yes. And what I've learned recently is that several of you, his gaze swept across Harrington, Shaw, and Chin, have been centralizing control of key infrastructure across 3 continents through a labyrinth of shell companies and proxy investors. Chen's face had gone entirely blank, the practiced emptiness of a poker player holding a losing hand. A monopoly built in shadows, Adrian continued. Energy distribution, telecommunications, water rights. All consolidated under entities that appear unrelated but ultimately trace back to a single controlling structure. Quite illegal under international antitrust laws, I should add. Harrington's composure finally cracked. You can't possibly have proof. I have enough, Adrian replied calmly. More importantly, I've already shared it with select regulatory authorities in multiple jurisdictions. Investigation pending, of course, but the evidence is rather compelling. The atmosphere in the room shifted from tension to something approaching panic as the implications became clear. These weren't men accustomed to being cornered. What do you want? Harrington asked, his voice tight. Adrian's expression remained impassive. First, the immediate cessation of all hostilities against my club and my interests. Second, you will divest from the monopolistic structure you've created, gradually, to avoid market disruption, but completely. Third, you will make substantial contributions to infrastructure development in the regions you've been exploiting. Or? Shaw challenged, though his confident facade had crumbled. Or I release everything. Adrian's voice was soft but unyielding. Every conversation, every deal, every questionable transaction that's occurred within these walls. Your empires won't survive the resulting investigations. He turned to address his security team. Escort our guests to the main floor. Their permanent membership privileges are hereby revoked. As his men moved to comply, Adrian focused his attention on Harrington. You forgot one crucial thing, Victor, he said, his voice pitched for their ears alone. I don't just own this place. I built it. Every wall, every system, every protocol was designed to my specifications. He leaned closer. You never had a chance. Harrington's face twisted with impotent rage as he was led toward the elevator, his security men already disarmed and contained. Throughout the confrontation, Mia had remained silent, watching the power dynamics shift in real time. As the room cleared, leaving only herself, Adrian, and 2 of his security personnel, she finally found her voice. You knew, she said. You knew they were planning something. Adrian turned to her, his expression softening slightly. I suspected. But I didn't know they'd move tonight. He hesitated, then added, Your warning made all the difference. 3 days after what staff had begun quietly referring to as the incident, Vanguard reopened its doors. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. The same discreet entrance, the same immaculate service, the same exclusive clientele. But beneath the surface, everything was different. Mia arrived for her shift precisely 15 minutes early, as always. The security scan at the employee entrance hummed with familiar efficiency, but Davis, the perpetually stoic guard, offered her a nod of recognition that bordered on respectful. "Evening, Davis," she said, the routine words carrying new weight. "Evening, Miss James," he replied, using her surname for the first time in a year. "You're expected upstairs." The private elevator, previously off-limits to regular staff, carried her directly to the top floor. Not to the VIP lounge where the confrontation had played out, but to an unmarked door beyond it. She hesitated before knocking, suddenly unsure of what awaited her on the other side. The door opened before her knuckles made contact. "Right on time," Adrian said, gesturing her inside. The office beyond defied expectations. Rather than the ostentatious display of wealth she might have anticipated from a billionaire's private sanctuary, the space was elegantly minimalist, functional rather than showy, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Please sit," Adrian indicated a chair across from his desk. Gone was the server's uniform, replaced by a tailored suit that somehow made him seem both more approachable and infinitely more formidable. "The club seems quiet tonight," Mia observed, settling into the offered seat. "A temporary situation," Adrian replied, taking his own chair. "We've revoked certain memberships and implemented enhanced vetting procedures. The resulting vacancies will be filled selectively." He studied her with the same intensity she noted during their shared shifts, only now there was no pretense of casual observation. "I imagine you have questions," he said. Mia considered this. "A few," she admitted. "Though I'm not sure which ones I'm permitted to ask." A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips. "After what you witnessed, I think we're beyond such concerns. Ask what you will." She chose her words carefully. "Was any of it real? The undercover persona?" "Parts," he acknowledged. "The backstory was fabricated, but the work itself." He shrugged. "I've found manual labor clarifies thinking. And there's a certain freedom in anonymity. And Vanguard? Is it really an intelligence operation?" Adrian leaned back, considering how much to reveal. "Vanguard serves multiple purposes. It's a legitimate business. A social hub for influential individuals. And yes, a sophisticated information-gathering network. The wealthy reveal remarkable things when they believe themselves among peers. Like monopolistic conspiracies," Mia suggested. "Among other things." Adrian's expression turned serious. "Which brings me to the purpose of this meeting. Your actions the other night prevented a potentially violent confrontation and preserved an operation years in the making. I'm grateful. I just did what seemed right," Mia said, uncomfortable with the praise. "Few people would have. Fewer still would have executed it so effectively." Adrian placed a folder on the desk between them. "I've reviewed your personnel file. Masters in finance. Top of your class. Yet you chose to work service positions in high-end establishments rather than pursue traditional banking or investment roles." Mia tensed slightly. "I prefer to observe systems from the inside. Theory only gets you so far." "Indeed." Something like approval flickered in Adrian's eyes. "You've been conducting your own form of intelligence gathering. Learning how the powerful operate by serving them directly." It wasn't a question, but Mia nodded anyway, surprised by his perception. "Which makes my proposition potentially appealing," he continued, sliding the folder toward her. "I'm offering you a new position within Vanguard's organization. Not as waitstaff, but as my personal liaison to our membership." Mia opened the folder to find a contract outlining a role that seemed tailored to her unique skill set, part analyst, part relationship manager, part intelligence operative. The compensation figure at the bottom made her breath catch. "This is," she began, unable to fully articulate her surprise. "Commensurate with the responsibility," Adrian finished for her. "The position requires someone who understands both worlds, service and power. Someone observant enough to identify patterns in seemingly casual interactions. Someone with discretion and judgment." He paused. "Someone I can trust." The last word hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Trust was clearly not something Adrian Locke extended lightly. "Why me?" Mia asked directly. "You have an entire security apparatus. Trained professionals. Who think like trained professionals?" Adrian countered. "You saw what they missed, the human element. The psychological tells. The social dynamics that security protocols can't capture." He leaned forward slightly. "And you acted on instinct when it mattered most." Mia closed the folder, buying time to process the offer. The position represented everything she'd been working toward: access, influence, the opportunity to understand how real power operated from its inner circle. "I should warn you," Adrian continued, "that accepting this role means entering a world you can't easily leave. The information you'll be privy to," he gestured vaguely, "it changes how you see everything. There's no going back to normal after that. I think normal became impossible the moment I slipped you that napkin," Mia replied with unexpected certainty. Adrian studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Take the weekend to consider. The offer remains open until Monday." As Mia rose to leave, a final question occurred to her. "The men from the other night, Harrington and the others, what happens to them? They're currently experiencing the consequences of their actions," Adrian said, his tone neutral but his eyes hard. "Financial regulators have taken an intense interest in their activities. Assets are being frozen. Questions are being asked in multiple jurisdictions. They won't retaliate? They'll be too busy surviving to consider revenge," he assured her. "And should they eventually recover enough to contemplate such foolishness?" A cold smile touched his lips. "Well, Vanguard's security extends far beyond these walls." At the door, Mia paused. "For what it's worth, I already know my answer." Adrian raised an eyebrow in question. "I've spent my life watching power from the periphery," she said, "learning its patterns, understanding its currencies. I think it's time I step closer to the center." He nodded, something like satisfaction in his expression. "Monday morning, then. We'll begin your orientation." As Mia left the office, the weight of her decision settled around her like a new garment, unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. She had glimpsed the machinery behind the world's elegant facade and chosen to step inside it rather than retreat. The elevator descended smoothly, carrying her back toward the world she'd known. But as the club's main floor came into view, gleaming and exclusive and filled with the powerful, she understood with perfect clarity that she was seeing it through new eyes. She would never be invisible again.